They called her a saint. Then they called her a witch. And finally, the headlines gave her a name that would stick to her skin like tar for the rest of her life: the Angel of Death. But before the cameras, before the handcuffs, and before the hatred of an entire nation turned against her, there was just a quiet house on a hill and a woman trying to ease the pain of a dying soul. This is not just a story about a murder accusation. This is a story about greed, about how easily the truth can be buried under a pile of gold. The Blackwood Manor sat on the edge of the city, isolated by a dense forest of pine trees. Inside, time seemed to move differently, slower, heavier. For 5 years, Elena Rossi had been the keeper of this time. Elena was 45, a woman with gentle hands and eyes that had seen too much suffering to be surprised by anything. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a companion, a cook, a confidant, and often the only human voice echoing in the vast, empty halls of the manor. Her patient was Margaret Blackwood, 82 years old, the matriarch of a crumbling dynasty, confined to a wheelchair by a stroke that had stolen her ability to walk but left her sharp, cynical mind intact. Every morning began the same way. At 6 a.m., Elena would wake up, wash her face with cold water, and put on her uniform. At 6:30 a.m., Elena would enter the master bedroom. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood," she would say. "The birds are loud today." Margaret would reply with a raspy voice, "They are mocking me, Elena. They know they can fly, and I cannot." For the next hour, Elena would perform the delicate dance of caretaking, checking vitals, blood pressure stable, heart rate stable. Then came the pills, 7 different bottles. She arranged them on a silver tray exactly how Margaret liked it. But there was something else Elena knew, something that cast a long shadow over their quiet days. Margaret Blackwood had 3 children, 3 grown, successful children who lived in the city, less than an hour away. Robert, the eldest, real estate developer, Julia, the socialite, and David, the gambler. In 5 years, Elena could count on one hand the number of times they had visited. The phone would ring occasionally. Usually it was Robert. "Is she lucid today, Elena?" he would ask impatiently. "Just make sure she signs the papers I sent over. It's for the estate tax. Don't let her forget." They didn't call to ask how their mother was feeling. They called to ask about the assets. Elena would hang up the phone and return to Margaret, finding the old woman looking out the window. Margaret knew. The disappointment had hardened into a callous layer around her heart years ago. It was a Tuesday in late October when the dynamic shifted. Margaret was weaker than usual. Suddenly, she reached out and gripped Elena's wrist. "Stop reading, Elena," she said. "I am dying. Don't look at me with pity. We both know it." Margaret took a deep breath. "I have been thinking about my legacy. My children, they are like vultures circling a dying animal. They wait for my last breath, not to mourn, but to feast. I have made a decision. Call my lawyer, Mr. Sterling. Tell him to come tomorrow morning, alone. I am changing the will." Elena felt a chill. "Are you sure, Margaret? This will cause a war." Margaret smiled for the first time. "Let them fight. You are the only one who has cleaned me, fed me, and listened to me without looking at your watch. You are the only daughter I have in spirit, if not in blood." The next day, the lawyer came. 2 weeks later, on a cold November morning, Elena walked into the bedroom with the silver tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood," she said. But there was no answer. The silence in the room was hollow. Margaret Blackwood was dead, and Elena's nightmare was just beginning. There is a specific kind of silence that follows death. It is heavier than normal silence. Elena touched Margaret's hand. It was already cooling. She walked to the phone and dialed Robert. "Mr. Blackwood? It's Elena. She's gone. Your mother passed away in her sleep." There was silence on the other end. Then Robert spoke, his voice cold. "I see. Don't call the funeral home yet. I need to call my siblings. And, Elena, don't touch anything else in the room. We'll be there in an hour." They arrived like a storm front. Robert, looking at his watch. Julia, hiding her eyes behind sunglasses. David, smelling of stale whiskey. Julia walked past Elena without looking at her. "God, this place smells like old age. We need to air it out before the appraisal. I assume you've packed your things? There's no need for a nurse anymore." They went straight upstairs. Not to the bedside, but to the safe in the closet. Eavesdropping from the hallway, Elena heard Robert's voice. "It's empty. The jewelry box is gone." "Maybe she moved it," David said. "Or maybe—" Robert stepped out of the room, his eyes locking onto Elena. The seed of suspicion was planted. The funeral was a performance. Robert gave a eulogy about a mother he hadn't visited in 6 months. Elena stood at the back, crying for the loneliness that had filled that big house. 2 days later, they gathered for the reading of the will. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, cleared his throat. "To my children, Robert, Julia, and David, I leave the contents of my personal safe, consisting of family photo albums. I hope you find the value in memories as you never found value in my presence." Shocked silence filled the room. Mr. Sterling continued, "As for the remainder of my estate, including Blackwood Manor, my investment accounts, and all liquid assets, I leave everything to the only person who stood by me until the end, Miss Elena Rossi." The room exploded. "You insane old bat!" Robert shouted. "This is fraud!" Julia pointed a finger at Elena. "What did you do to her? You manipulated a dying woman." Robert loomed over Elena. "You won't see a dime of this. I will bury you in court." Then David spoke quietly. "Robert, wait. The medicine. She changed the will 2 weeks before she died, and then she dies in her sleep? Doesn't that seem convenient?" A terrifying understanding passed between the siblings. The narrative shifted from fraud to murder. Justice is supposed to be blind, but in a city run by old money, justice often peeks from under the blindfold. Robert Blackwood went straight to the district attorney. It was 8 p.m. when the police arrived at Blackwood Manor. "Elena Rossi? I'm Detective Graves," the officer said. "We have a warrant to search the premises." They tore the house apart, and then they found it. In the trash can of the master bathroom, hidden beneath used tissues, an empty vial labeled morphine sulfate. Detective Graves held it up. "Care to explain why an empty vial of high-grade morphine is in the trash 2 days after your patient died?" Elena was shocked. "That was for emergencies. I never used it. It should be full." "Well, it's empty now," the detective said. While the police built the legal case, the siblings built the court of public opinion. Julia Blackwood told the cameras, "We trusted her, and she preyed on our mother." The headlines were brutal. "The Angel of Death." 3 days later, the toxicology report came back. Margaret Blackwood had died of an overdose. They didn't arrest her at the mansion. They arrested her in public, at a grocery store. "Elena Rossi, you are under arrest for the first-degree murder of Margaret Blackwood." As Elena was pushed into the police car, she realized something terrifying. Truth doesn't matter when the lie is this expensive. Someone had emptied that vial, and she was the one going to prison for it. The first night in jail is the longest. Elena was alone. Just as she was about to give up hope, a guard walked to her bars. "Rossi, you have a visitor."
Says he's your lawyer." Marcus Thorne was not the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances. He was the kind of lawyer who chased monsters. He sat across from Elena in the visitation room. "I don't want your money, Elena," Thorne said. "I want the truth. I read the police report. The vial in the trash can? A nurse with 20 years of experience knows that morphine vials go in the sharps container, not the bathroom bin. It was planted."
While Elena sat in her cell, Thorne went to war. The prosecution's case rested on the fact that only Elena and Margaret were in the house. But Thorne knew something about old mansions. They have secrets. He subpoenaed the smart home security logs, and he found it, a digital ghost. On the night of Margaret's death, at 2:14 a.m., the motion sensor in the service tunnel was triggered. The alarm didn't sound because that zone had been put into maintenance mode using a master code. 2 weeks before the trial, Thorne deposed Robert Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood, where were you on the night of November 14th? "Asleep? Alone?" Robert replied. "Interesting," Thorne said, "because your mother's security system logs show that your personal access code was used to disable the basement alarm at 2:09 a.m. that night." Robert froze. Thorne leaked this information to Julia's lawyer. The alliance of the siblings began to crumble. If Robert was there, maybe he killed Mom. Julia didn't want to go to prison for her brother. The trial of the Angel of Death was the biggest event the city had seen. The prosecution presented their case: the empty vial, the will, the autopsy. Then Marcus Thorne stood up. "Your Honor, the defense calls only one witness. We call Margaret Blackwood." The judge looked confused. "Mr. Thorne, unless you have a Ouija board, explain yourself." "No Ouija board, Your Honor. But Margaret Blackwood didn't just write diaries, she dictated them." Thorne held up an old silver digital voice recorder. This was found taped to the underside of Mrs. Blackwood's wheelchair. "This is a recording from the night of November 14th. Thorne pressed play. The courtroom went silent. A crackly recording filled the room. "I knew you would come," Margaret's voice said weakly. Then Robert's voice, angry. "Cut the drama, Mother. Where is the new will?" "It is done, Robert. You are too late." Then Julia's voice, sharp and panicked. "He's coming tomorrow morning to finalize it. If she dies tonight, the old will stands." The jury gasped. Robert's voice again. "Sign this revocation, Mother, or so help me God." "Or what? You'll kill me?" Then sounds of a struggle. Julia screamed, "Shut up, David, we are losing everything. $10 million to the maid." Then the sound of a syringe. "What are you doing, Julia?" Margaret asked. "It's better this way, Mom. No pain. Just drift away." "Hold her arm, Robert. Do it." Then silence. Julia whispered, "It's done. Wipe the vial. Put it in the nurse's trash. We were never here." The recording ended. Mayhem erupted in the courtroom. It wasn't Robert who held the needle. It was Julia. Julia stood up and screamed, "That's fake! She manipulated the tape!" But it was over. The police moved in. Robert Blackwood, arrested for conspiracy. David Blackwood, arrested as an accessory. Julia Blackwood, arrested for first-degree murder. Elena watched them being handcuffed. She didn't smile. She looked at the recorder. Even in her final moments, terrified and betrayed by her own flesh and blood, Margaret Blackwood's last act was one of protection.
6 months later, the gavel came down. Julia received life in prison. With the siblings behind bars, Elena Rossi inherited everything, $50 million. People expected her to move into the mansion, to live the life they had killed for. But Elena had a different plan. She walked into the master bedroom. She didn't feel ghosts anymore. She felt a responsibility. She poured every cent of the money into renovating the estate. She turned Blackwood Manor into a state-of-the-art hospice, a home for the elderly who had no family, a place where no one would ever have to die alone. The room where Robert had plotted his mother's death was now a library. The garden where Julia had hosted parties was now filled with lavender, Margaret's favorite scent. Elena kept enough to live comfortably, but she stayed at the home as the director. She still wakes up at 6 a.m., but now she does it because she wants to. Sometimes she walks past the portrait of Margaret hanging in the main hall. She stops and whispers, "We won." The Blackwood children wanted an inheritance, but in their greed they forgot a simple truth. You cannot inherit what you do not honor. The children inherited a cage, and the nurse, she inherited the legacy of care.
Greed can turn family into strangers, and strangers into saviors. Arthur Vance lost his reputation to a lie. Elena Rossi almost lost her freedom to greed. But both found that the truth has a way of surfacing. So I ask you, have you ever seen money destroy a family? Have you witnessed a time when greed blinded people to what really matters? I want to hear your story in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Until the next story, keep searching for the truth.